everyone, it's Stephanie here, and I'm back for the final day of summer school for this year. This is going to be a lesson on ombre cards, and we're going to create two different cards, and I'm going to show you two of my favorite ways to create an ombre design. So for my first card sample, I want to use the Happy Birthday to You Die-namics, and I want to create a panel of cardstock that has inking on it in an ombre look. So I want to start with the darkest color and kind of fade into a lighter color, eventually going into the white, and I want to die cut all of the letters from this panel. So I picked out three green colors of distress ink that go really nicely together. I have Lucky Clover, Evergreen Bough, and Cracked Pistachio. And what I'm doing is I'm starting with the lightest color first and adding it to my cardstock panel. That's the Cracked Pistachio. I'm then coming in with my medium color, which is Evergreen Bough, and I'm starting to add some of that darker color towards the right-hand side of the panel there. And then at the very end, I'm going to come in with Lucky Clover, which is my darkest color. And I'm going to add this right against the right-hand side, and I'm going to blend it into the Evergreen Bough. And then I'm just going to use all of my blending tools and kind of keep blending back and forth until I have a really nice seamless transition between all three of the colors. And what we're left with when we're done all of the inking is this really cool ombre look where we have the darkest color there on the side, and it just slowly blends down into the lighter colors and eventually into the white on the panel. So what I'm going to do now is take the Happy Birthday to You die, and I'm going to position it so that it starts on the darker color, and I'm going to have it kind of go into the lighter color as we make our way across all three rows of those words. And you can see here now that I have it die cut, I have all of my letters here, and we can see that great ombre effect that we get just by simply die cutting it from that inked panel. So now I want to add all of the letters to my cardstock panel. So I find the easiest way to do this is to take the negative of that die cut piece, so the background piece there that we added all of the ink to, and I just positioned that onto my cardstock panel where I want the letters to line up, and I use some post-it tape to hold it down so it doesn't shift. And now I'm just using some liquid glue and adding it to each of the letters individually and just adding them into the open spaces. It's almost like a puzzle because they perfectly fit in there, and it's a really quick and easy way to make sure everything is spaced properly and lined up perfectly on the panel. Adding all of the letters onto the panel does take a little bit of time, but you can definitely see that it's worth it once I've removed that negative piece and you can see all of those letters perfectly lined up on the panel. And we have that great ombre effect on the letters, which is just a really great way to add some interest to a sentiment. Now we're going to keep this card pretty simple in design because I wanted to really leave the focus on the ombre letters that we created, but I did want to add a secondary sentiment to this as well. So what I'm doing is I'm just stamping this Let's Celebrate You from the More Essential Sentiment stamp set, and I've stamped this onto a black strip of cardstock, and I'm adding some white embossing powder, and I'm going to heat set that. Then I'm just going to trim this little strip down with my scissors and give it kind of a slanted edge. And we're going to layer it right along the bottom row where it says To You. I did add some foam adhesive onto the back of this strip to give it a bit of dimension, and now I'm just lining it up here onto my panel. I did trim off the extra that was hanging over the side, and now I'm adding the entire panel to a top folding Grossery card base. I did add foam adhesive to the panel for some more added dimension, and the card base measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches in size. Now moving on to my second example, this one is going to feature some stamping and some inking directly over our stamped images. So I have these candle stamps here, and you can see they're pretty colorful. I did some different techniques with the stamp set, and I ended up getting a nice rainbow look to my stamps. This won't transfer at all, it's just a permanent stain on there. It doesn't affect the stamp whatsoever, and I'm just going to go ahead and stamp these onto this white panel with some Versamark ink. So I've added the candles as well as the birthday sentiment above them. And I'm heavily coating these in the ink so that I can get a really nice stamped impression. I'm adding a little bit of anti-static powder to the panel first, and then I'm going to stamp these on there. I am going to add some white embossing powder to the entire panel, and then we're going to heat set that to create this pattern in the background that we're going to add ink over top of. So I'm just adding the white embossing powder, and you can kind of see when I tilt this in the light, you can see that white embossing powder sitting on the panel. Since it is tone on tone, it's kind of hard to see, but once we start to add the ink, you'll see that come through without any problem. For this one here, I'm going to do pretty much the exact same thing we did on the first example, but rather than have a die cut piece coming out of this, we are doing the inking directly over our stamping, and we're going to keep the entire panel on the card. I decided to change up the colors for this one, so I'm using shades of pink. I have Spun Sugar as the base color, which is a very light pink color. You can see there it's barely showing up on the panel. And then I have Worn Lipstick and Picked Raspberry as my second two colors. The Worn Lipstick is pretty dark, so I used a very light hand. This is a newer ink pad, so it was pretty juicy. So I was just very careful to not really press down on the blending tool. And I always go back and forth between my blending tools to really get a nice even blend. I then went in with my picked raspberry at the very bottom to give it a really nice vibrant pink color and get that really cool ombre effect from the darkest to the lightest as we went up the panel. And then once we have all of that inking done, I'm going to once again create a secondary sentiment, the same as we did on the first card. So I have a black strip of cardstock, and I have another sentiment from that same More Essential Sentiment stamp set, and I'm stamping this onto the cardstock strip with Versamark ink. I'm then adding some white embossing powder on this. I'm going to heat set it, and then I'm going to trim it down the same as I did on the first card and give the edge a little bit of a slant just for a little bit of a different look. I added foam adhesive to the back of this strip, and I'm just going to add it right along the candles there at the bottom. I like to use my T-square ruler anytime I'm adding a strip with a sentiment on it just to make sure I get it lined up perfectly straight on the panel. I'm trimming off the little bit of extra we have here, and then once again I'm going to add this one to a top folding A2 size card base, which is also grout gray and measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And now you can see I have two finished cards here that both feature an ombre design. I used inking on one panel with some embossed stamping underneath, and then for the first one there I used the inking on the panel and then die cut directly from that to give my letters an ombre look. Okay, this lesson officially wraps up summer school for this year. Please make sure to check out the video description below as well as the coordinating blog post for a chance to enter your homework for today's lesson, and we hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for joining us for Summer School 2018.